If you are a video game, or any piece of narrative-driven media for that matter, then it doesn't matter how good your visuals, sound, or overall plot are if you don't nail the ending. Over the years, we've seen games wrap up their stories in all manner of ways, from heartwarmingly happy to downright miserable. Every so often, though, a developer will slip in a conclusion to a game that's completely out of left field, leaving audiences amused, bemused, and confused in equal measure. For this list, we're taking a look at some of the most insane endings that some players ended up with in their favourite titles, thanks to interesting choices they made along the way. Whether the whole thing is being controlled by an unlikely overlord, or the player's actions simply stop the whole thing dead in its tracks, if it's bonkers, then it's welcome here. We will of course be discussing plot details for most of these games and endings of all of them, so a spoiler warning is very much in effect. I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are the 10 weirdest alternate endings in video games. Number 10. Becoming a Mechanic, Metal Saga. One of the great things about your average RPG is just how much time you can spend playing before you get anything even close to an ending. There's nothing like subverting expectations though, and a game that did exactly that was 2005's Metal Saga. The game itself came with multiple endings. Several could only be achieved after hours of gameplay, some after less than 1 hour. But by making a wrong decision early on, some unlucky players ended up with only about 5 minutes of gameplay. The first thing the player is asked after inputting their name is whether they want to become a hunter or a mechanic. Since the whole point of the game is for the player character to become a hunter like their father, the choice for many players was obvious. Some, however, took it to be more of a class choice and opted to become a mechanic, thinking it would take the game in a different direction. They were of course wrong. Instead, they ended up with a cutscene in which their father expressed his disappointment, and an epilogue that explained how the protagonist lived one of the most boring lives ever imagined. Oh well, if at first you don't succeed, try and try again. Number 9. Dance Party, Deus Ex Invisible War. You might not think that a story centered on a world gripped by war and economic depression would have much room for silliness, but in the case of Deus Ex Invisible War, if you did think that, then you'd be wrong, my friend. The 2003 title already comes with a bunch of serious endings which are dependent on the choices the player makes throughout the game, but there is one that's not quite like the others, which players can unlock by simply placing a flag in a toilet. Upon reaching the final area, the player needs to find and pick up a UNATCO flag, then take it to the office of Joseph Mandely and flush it down the loo. They'll then be presented with the message, "And now for the real end game," before being transported to the DX2 rap party. That's right, the real end game is in fact a dance party in which the game's cast of characters can be found boogieing on down at Club Vox, alongside a bunch of penguins that are, for reasons unknown, on fire. Unfortunately for players, there's no way out of the party, so if they want to wrap things up, they'll have to reload a previous save and pick a proper ending. See, that's what you get for being silly. Number 8. Wiped from Existence, Nier. Like many RPGs, 2010's Nier boasts a load of different endings, but unlike many other games of a similar genre, in order to get them all, the player needs to play through Nier multiple times. Though each of the title's endings are unique, it's the fourth that lives in infamy. The protagonist is presented with a choice to save a dying Kaine. They can either end her suffering by plunging their sword into her chest, or they can sacrifice themselves and trade their existence for hers. Many players choose the latter, as it seems like the noble thing to do, though most would live to regret it. Deciding to exchange the protagonist's life for Kaine's results in them being completely erased from existence. Not only do they die, but they're wiped from the memories of everyone that's ever known them. Perhaps the most infuriating thing, however, is the fact that this also wipes the player's save data, and so all of their progress is completely erased. Yeah, you heard that right. Every quest, weapon, item, and piece of information is deleted before the player's very eyes. It's also no use trying to create another character with the same name either, as Nia simply won't allow it.
Nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everybody's gonna die.
Number 7. Giving your friends food poisoning. Persona 4 Arena. It's fair to say that most of us have had a culinary disaster or two.
Into the nice tomatoes in broth, Peter Austin. I forgot to bring it with me. I'm really sorry.
But there are probably very few of you out there that have been unfortunate enough to give all of your friends food poisoning. Sadly, this is exactly the fate that befalls pals of Yukiko Amagi in 2012's Persona 4 Arena. Concerned for the welfare of her boxed lunch, which even she admits smells a bit off, Yukiko must choose whether to check on the food or have faith in herself. Picking the latter option will see the game continue as it should, but deciding to see if the food is okay triggers Yukiko's rather bizarre alternate ending. Rather than testing the lunch herself, she opts to force feed it to Teddy, who is immediately poisoned by it. After mistaking his convulsions for amazing energy, Yukiko falls under the impression that her food has healing powers, and she proceeds to give it to all of her friends. Unsurprisingly, everyone except Yukiko falls ill, and though she muses that they've probably all come down with swine flu, it's not unfair to assume that they're all dealing with the rather unpleasant after effects of whatever was in that boxed lunch. No, none for me, thanks. I'm on keto. Number 6. Strapping your enemies to rockets. Tekken 6. To some, golf might seem like a fairly boring sport. However, the stress-relieving properties of going down your local driving range and smacking the heck out of a few balls are irrefutable.
You're gonna die, clown!
With that said though, we can't in good conscience advise using Tekken 6's Lee Chaolan as an example of how to deal with anger issues, as to say that the fate he bestows upon Heihachi, Kazuya and Jin is extreme is a bit of an understatement. After playing through the game as Lee, players are treated to an ending in which the silver-haired stud blows off a bit of steam down at his local golf course. He's not looking for any birdies or eagles though, and is instead punting explosive balls in the direction of his 3 foes, each of whom are strapped to rather imposing-looking rockets. It doesn't take long for Lee to hit his target, and the trio are sent zooming into the air before exploding into a colourful display of fireworks. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that regular golf could be spiced up by strapping the losers to rockets, but I'm also not saying that either. I'm sure there's a non-lethal way we could do this, right? Number 5. Chun-Li's Party Time, Street Fighter 2. Have you ever wondered what heroes do once they've achieved their objective? Well, if it were me, I'd be heading home for some quiet time and a good long snooze. But it turns out that for Street Fighter 2's Chun-Li, a cup of cocoa and an early night just isn't gonna cut it. Instead, she's gonna party like it's 1999. Indeed, players who beat M. Bison as Chun-Li get a bit of insight into what the young lass plans to get up to next. Whilst visiting her father's grave, she tells him that she's avenged his death by killing Bison, that she's brought an end to his evil empire, and that her pops can now rest in peace. Clearly sick of beating up baddies though, she decides that rather than continuing her heroics, she's going to spend a bit of time enjoying her youth, and tells the gravestone that she's going to go back to being a young single girl. The second the words are out of her mouth, she lets down her hair, both literally and figuratively, and gets rid of her fighting gear in favour of a pair of short shorts and, oh, what's that? A half shirt.
I see midriff. It feels exploitative.
That'll never catch on. Number 4. The Land of Chocolate, 1213. Anyone that's played 1213 from beginning to end will tell you it's not exactly a feel-good game. Created by Ben Yahtzee Croshaw, yes, that one, 1213 tells the story of a captive who's being tortured by a bespectacled man and who is only ever addressed by his number. After the door to his cell mysteriously opens one day, he must explore the world around him to find answers to all of his questions. We won't spoil the real ending, but suffice it to say that it's a little on the bleak side. Anyone who endures the depressing conclusion to the game will be rewarded, though, with a special code they can use during a replay, which unlocks the secret ending. Upon emerging from his prison, 1213 finds that the entire world, including all of its inhabitants, is now made from chocolate. The explanation is there was an accident at a toxic waste facility, which also happened to be the world's largest chocolate storage facility, and the Earth's atmosphere was rendered too delicious for human habitation. 1213 is initially rather distressed by all this, since he's forced to live out his days alone, but he quickly decides that gorging himself to death on chocolate isn't such a bad way to go. And I mean, he's not wrong.
Disgusting!
Number 3. Choosing neither side and going for a drink instead. The Bard's Tale. We've all had days where everything's gotten a bit overwhelming, and the only thing left to do is to say sod it and go to the pub. Though I can't think of a time where I've done this at the expense of deciding the fate of the world. The Bard's Tale is already a bit of a silly affair, and follows the adventures of the titular bard as he becomes embroiled in a plot to free the Princess Calais, much to the chagrin of a local cult. At the end of the game, the bard must decide whether to fight Calais or the druid leader Finnog, a choice which can lead to the destruction of the world should the player choose poorly. Unlike protagonists in other such games, however, the bard is a completely selfish man interested only in coin and cleavage, and so the player can decide to instead leave Calais and Finnog to their quarrel and choose the out-of-here option instead. This admittedly results in legions of undead overrunning the world, which obviously isn't ideal, but the bard doesn't feel too bad about it on account of the fact that they all make such good drinking buddies. Next round's on me, guys. Number 2. Following Min's Orders, Far Cry 4. For the vast majority of players, Far Cry 4 is a lengthy tale that sees the player pitted against sharp-dressed baddie Pagan Min, amidst a civil war in the fictional country of Kyrat. It isn't initially the protagonist's intent to get caught up in the conflict, having only travelled to the country in order to spread his mother's ashes. But when his bus is attacked and he gets kidnapped by Min, the events of the game are set in motion. After being taken to Min's mansion, the smooth-talking antagonist leaves the room for a short while and orders the player to stay put. Naturally, having looked on as Min's men gunned down a whole bunch of folks, most just wanted to get the heck out of Dodge. Obedient players, however, found that simply following Min's order to stay where they were resulted in him escorting them to his half-sister's shrine so that mother and daughter could be reunited, before taking them back to his helicopter and declaring that maybe now we can finally shoot some goddamn guns. Only players don't get to shoot any goddamn guns, as the game ends there after a runtime of only 15 minutes. Short and sweet, I suppose.
That's it? That's the last episode?
And number 1, The Dog, Silent Hill 2. Of course this is number 1. Now, of all the video game franchises there are in existence, Konami's Silent Hill series probably isn't the first that would spring to mind if you were asked which was the most likely to include a daft ending. Unless, of course, you know. The games are largely notable for their disturbing themes and spooky atmosphere, so it was somewhat jarring for players who stumbled across one of the alternate endings. Of course, we must give an honourable mention to Silent Hill's UFO ending, in which protagonist Harry Mason is abducted by aliens, a move which completely subverts players' expectations. Silent Hill 2's dog ending, however, pips the UFO to the post for how utterly bonkers it really is. It took players some finding, requiring them to get all 3 normal endings and then play the game again, but there's no question that all the effort was well worth it. After jumping through the multiple necessary hoops, James Sunderland can use a hidden key to enter the observation room of the Lakeview Hotel, only to find that the events of the game have all been controlled by a Shiba Inu. Upon discovering this, he falls to his knees in despair, lamenting that the dog was behind things the whole time. Now, I can see why he felt that way initially, but look how cute she is. I can't imagine he stayed mad at her for very long. Ah.